everybody. I'm Kelly, and this is Two Broads Talking Politics. Again, tonight we're actually four broads talking politics. So I'm joined tonight by my co-host, Sophie.
Hello.
And we have with us here today Alison, who's the Executive Director of an Education Foundation.
Hi there.
And we have Shannon, who's an education reporter.
Yep, glad to be here.
So you may have guessed from who our guests are that tonight's topic is education. Our focus will be on K-12 education, and we want to just sort of take stock of what education looks like right now, broadly speaking, under the Trump and Betsy DeVos regime, and then focus a little more locally, I think, on what's going on in actual schools, what we can all do about it, how parents who are concerned can get involved. We are, all four of us on this podcast are parents, so that's a particular focus for all of us. So I'm going to just do a little bit of a background on why this topic is so interesting to me, if that's okay. So I grew up going to public schools in a place where public schools were very good, and I always assumed growing up my kids would also go to public schools. Then I started living in Chicago, and basically from the moment I got pregnant, I started worrying about where I was going to send my kids to school. It's not as obvious a decision when you live in a big city, especially one like Chicago. And I spent literally years doing all the research I could do on schooling, thinking nonstop about where my kids would go to school, talking to every parent I could find, going on school tours, reading the CPS Obsessed website, reading the CPS Guide to Schools, talking to principals. It was a very exhausting process. In the end, after having applied for my now kindergartner to, I don't even know, I think 20 different schools, having visited probably at least 8 different schools, doing all this research, we ended up, he's now in kindergarten, and we're at a school that we're very, very, very happy with. I love the school he's at. I think it's a perfect fit for our family, but it is not a public school, and I am racked with guilt all the time about the fact that I don't send my kid to a public school. In a twist of fate, perhaps, the day we got the letter saying he had gotten into Catholic school was the same day that Betsy DeVos was confirmed to be the Secretary of Education, which didn't put me in a very good state of mind about education in this country in general. And so I think, sort of looking back on all of that, I'm interested in helping the public schools in my neighborhood, even if I'm not currently sending my kids there. And I'm interested in knowing, just what is going on in education, and was I right to be as worried about Betsy DeVos as I was? So that's a little background to why we're having this conversation. I think maybe the place to start, since I've mentioned DeVos a few times and we have Alison with us, is to just sort of talk about who is Betsy DeVos, where did she come from, what is she doing getting this job as Secretary of Education, how should we think about her?
Well, like you said, I'm from Michigan. This is Alison, and I was telling Shannon right before we started that I've actually been dealing with Betsy DeVos in one way or another since I was a freshman in high school, which sounds crazy to everybody else, but she became the chair of the Michigan Republican Party in 1996. And so it kind of started then, but you actually have to go back further to understand her outlook on education, and I'll try to make this pretty quick, but Michigan's kind of weird. K-12 education is really state by state. So what I say about Michigan may not apply to other people, but I think it gives a good groundwork for, Betsy. So in 1993, the Michigan GOP decided that they wanted to cut taxes, particularly property taxes, which in Michigan were high. This matters because in the 90s and still today, a lot of states based how they fund their schools solely on property taxes. So if your town could afford to levy more taxes to pay for the schools, then your schools got more money. So when you want to cut the property taxes across the board, that means at that time you were cutting the money the schools were getting. The GOP at that time said, hey, we're going to cut 20%. And it was actually she was a Democratic state senator at the time, but now our national senator, Debbie Stabenow, who proposed what she thought was going to call their bluff. She proposed eliminating 100% of the property taxes in the state of Michigan. And 24 hours later, they passed it and, in effect, defunded the entire school system. And this actually came to a head because that same year there was a school up north, and I know it because I used to teach up there, that had to close a couple of months before the end of their school year because they ran out of money, because their school wasn't funded at a high enough level to literally keep the doors open. As I was saying, they literally defund the schools in Michigan. They have to come up with a plan to refund them. The plan is complicated. It involves some sales tax. It involves taxing cigarettes. Yeah, our schools are funded by cigarette taxes in our state.
Perverse
And
incentive to get people to smoke more.
right, right, because I mean, it's the truth. If everybody smokes less, less goes into our school aid fund. Not a ton, but less. But what they said was, okay, everybody, here is how much you can tax your citizens for their property. We're going to collect it at the state level. And then what they did was bring everybody up to what they call, I think it's like the basic level, but there's basically 3 tiers, okay? So they brought everybody up to this minimum. So obviously some schools really benefited, right? And then there were people who were already funding above that. So they said, okay, you're going to get a little bit more because we don't want to cut anybody when we do this. And there were about 50 districts in the state who, and most districts, by the way, fell between this minimum and this basic level. And then they said, okay, everybody else, we're going to let you keep asking your taxpayers for that amount above and beyond that they had always been paying, okay? And we're going to move to a per student basis. So each student in the state of Michigan is counted, and you get money based on how many kids attend your schools. What does this have to do with Betsy DeVos? At that same time, when they came up with all of this, is when they started allowing charter schools. So fast forward a little bit, Betsy DeVos, like I said, 96, she becomes chair of the Republican Party, and things are going along okay. Like, she's clearly interested in school vouchers, but she keeps getting told, no, now is not the time. Now is not the time. So in 2000, the governor went out of the state. She put something on the ballot to fund vouchers in our state. And the governor said, no, don't do that. It's not the time. She's the head of the GOP at this time. So she waits till he leaves the state and calls him that morning and says, oh, I'm holding a press conference in 2 hours saying that I'm stepping down as chair. And so he flies back. It's this big mess. It goes on the ballot. It gets defeated 69% to 31%. Like 69% of the state said, no, we don't want vouchers. So she puts all of her effort into charters. And to tell you, like, I graduated in 2000. I don't remember charter schools in Michigan at that time. I'm sure that they were there, they were legal, but they just weren't a thing. Her husband at one point runs for governor, and he loses. And at that point, they kind of decide, going through the legal channels, that sounds worse than it is, but going through the voters, going through the voters is not the way to do what we want to do. We are going to just start funding candidates. And at that point, they just start flooding money into the system. So like things happened, like there was a candidate who opposed, a GOP candidate who opposed what she wanted to do with charter schools at one point because he saw that it's going to hurt rural schools, right? Michigan education is super local. You might have a district in northern Michigan with 250 kids or 125 kids, K through 12. Well, if you're putting a charter school there and they're siphoning off kids and our funding is per student, that school has less money to operate on, right? So this rural Michigan legislator said, this is going to hurt my schools. They did everything they could to get him out of office after that. He was on their side. He was voting the way they wanted and everything else. They didn't win, thank goodness, but there's been other things like that where they want something to happen and they will do whatever they can. Like in 2002, when she first started the Great Lakes Education Project, which is just one of her PACs that she runs, that first election, she had more money in that to back her causes than the Michigan Education Association, which is the biggest union in the state, She had more money than the United Auto Workers or any other Democratic PAC in the state. Just her, like her backed organization. So that's where we're at, just that she's been putting all of this money through. And you'll watch things happen in our state. Last year, there was a headline on September 26th that said, West Michigan Forum, the DeVos family targets pension reform. So they had this West Michigan Forum, and out of it came the idea, we're going after public pensions. And by early June of 2017, the pension system had been eliminated for teachers or drastically changed so as to make it very unattractive to new teachers coming in. When people are talking about her and like she has a lack of experience, all of that is true. But in the state, what we've seen is more when that family, and it's more about the family than just her, though education is her personal crusade. When that family wants something done, they have the funds to make it happen.
So I think it's pretty obvious why Trump would then want her in his cabinet. Sounds like they're cut from the same cloth. I mean, it sounds, for whatever reason, like there's a sense of entitlement there that we see in a lot of other cabinet members.
Yeah, well, and she's come right out and said, we're one of the biggest donors of soft money, and we expect to see results from it. Like, it's an almost verbatim quote. So she does fit in with them, though she is a little bit more politically savvy than maybe some of the others are, just because, like I said, she's been in politics for so long. Mm-hmm. But she definitely sees things like the ruling on Citizens United as great because it kind of took off any handcuffs she might have had. And I do want to amend one thing here. There is one small difference, which is a glimmer of a silver lining. Having lived in Grand Rapids, I feel that I do have to mention it. They are the 24th most charitable family in the country. And I don't mean politically charitable. I mean normal charitable. If you walk around Grand Rapids, the amount of money that they have donated, like my son was born in a hospital next door to the Helen DeVos Children's Hospital. The performing arts are all supported by the DeVos family. Art Prize, if you've ever heard of it, is backed by one of their sons. So they are incredibly giving, but they are also a very political family who expect certain things to happen once they back them with their money. And everybody in our state just knows that. And I'll be done on this. Naively, when she was selected as secretary, for about 5 minutes I thought, hey, well, maybe this means that she can't spend money in our state anymore. But it's a whole family thing, and if you really want to go into her in depth, Politico did a great article that outlines it really well, like everything about West Michigan and her family, and it's how Betsy DeVos used God and Amway to take over Michigan politics. And it's really thorough, fantastic. It goes A to Z, how we got to Betsy DeVos. So yeah, that's Betsy DeVos.
Any of the articles that we mention, we'll put links up on Twitter and Facebook as well, if you're interested in finding those. Okay, so we have a very good and thorough, thank you, Alison, description of sort of where Betsy DeVos comes from and what she's interested in. And, I think we can talk about some of the ways that it's dangerous to have people who think they can just buy their way into whatever they want. But perhaps also we've already seen a little bit how at the national level she can't just get anything she wants just by using money. So let's talk about some of the things, some of the policy things that both DeVos and Trump have tried to do, want to do, have already done that have affected schools, but also I think more what we're seeing has affected students. And we can sort of talk through a few of those things. I've been reading a few articles on this, and I've talked to some teachers I know as well, especially high school teachers, about what they're actually seeing in the classrooms, and a lot of it seems to be more based on students and how students are feeling and how teachers are feeling than about actual policy decisions. And then, what I really want to get to here in all of this is at the local level,